Human rights groups and activists from around the world are once again raising their voice against Guantanamo Bay Prison. The infamous U.S. facility in Cuba has seen lives crushed and many detainees still being held there without trial. They say death for them may be better than living the way they do. Dozens of protests have been set up today as part of a, quote, global day of action to close Guantanamo. Campaigners say they must battle the grave injustice of the U.S. government, as well as broken promises by President Obama to shut down the prison. Here's RT's Marina Portnaya.
I have said repeatedly that I intend to close Guantanamo, and I will follow through on that. Guantanamo will be closed no later than 1 year from now. When I was elected in 2008, I said we need to close Guantanamo. I continue to believe that we've got to close Guantanamo.
This needs to be the year Congress lifts the remaining restrictions on detainee transfers and we close the prison at Guantanamo Bay.
The highly contentious Guantanamo Bay prison has cemented a U.S. legacy of covert kidnappings, waterboardings, illegal detention, and force feedings. More than 100 prisoners starved themselves for roughly 6 months last year protesting the injustice, forcing the U.S. president to appeal once again to an opposing Congress for the island prison to be closed. Exactly 12 months later,
nothing really has changed. Guantanamo is still open. Prisoners are being force-fed every day. They're being held in conditions of solitary confinement. And there is no word on when 77 of them still in the prison who have been cleared for release for years will ever get to leave.
154 detainees are still languishing at Gitmo, but something has changed. Guantanamo officials no longer acknowledge hunger strikes, officially calling them long-term non-religious fasts instead. Force feeding is now called enteral feeding, and the U.S. military refuses to disclose how many prisoners are being forced to endure the so-called standard procedure. A procedure that rapper Mos Def attempted to undergo. Please, don't. Unable to successfully complete due to the overwhelming pain he said he experienced.
The policy of the United States fighting to have a place where they can do whatever they want to do to people is still intact, and this is what we're protesting, along with a clear policy of indefinite detention, which President Obama in particular has embraced.
The U.S. government opened Gitmo in January 2002 to house alleged terrorists. 12 years later, the majority of prisoners have proved to have no links to terrorism. Washington can't say the same about its ongoing links to torture and indefinite detention. Marina Portnaya, RT.
Guantanamo first opened its doors back in 2002, just 3 months after the September the 11th attacks. Now, throughout these years, some 800 people have been held there in the jail's confines. And while Washington justified its existence with the battle against terror, America's treatment of prisoners has landed it in hot water. There have been reports that doctors and legal experts in Guantanamo violated ethical norms during interrogations. That included extended sleep deprivation, also waterboarding as well. And the U.S. Defense Department and CIA, though, they deny all such allegations, calling them, quote, erroneous. But when over 2/3 of the inmates refused food last February, the U.S. opted for force feeding, despite the method being labeled as torture by the UN Human Rights Commission. Now, a lawyer for one of the prisoners says the men being held are desperate.
The greatest problem at the moment is a regime of genital searches that the commander of the Joint Detention Group has instituted, whereby if you want to go from camp to camp, you are searched extremely thoroughly, if I may say. It's the psychological condition of being held in indefinite detention that's the real problem. The men are desperate. Now that there is light at the end of the tunnel, the men are pleading to get home to their families. It's been 12 years. I think that the issue is not should you house detainees in better housing, but should you transfer them or deal with them in a correct way from the standpoint of the system of justice. It really doesn't matter how you're indefinitely detained. What matters is being indefinitely detained.